I am 32 years old, and my wife, Chloe, is 28.
We had been married for 4 years. On a quiet Tuesday evening, my entire life changed over a cup of lukewarm tea. Chloe sat across from me at the kitchen island. She looked at me with a practiced expression of fake vulnerability.
Mark, I think we need to talk about our future.
I set my mug down and waited. She did not hesitate for even a second.
I feel like I lost myself in this marriage. I need an open relationship to explore my identity.
She claimed she wanted to grow as an individual. She said that monogamy was an outdated social construct that trapped creative souls. My analytical brain immediately started processing her words. People do not ask for an open marriage on a random Tuesday unless they already have someone lined up. For the past 3 months, Chloe had been acting noticeably distant. She changed her phone passcode and kept her screen face down. She joined the local church choir and suddenly had late-night practice sessions every Thursday. She came home smelling like expensive men's cologne that I never wore. I did not scream or throw a tantrum. I simply stared at my soon-to-be ex-wife and kept my voice completely neutral. An open relationship is a massive step, Chloe. Are you sure about this?
Yes, it will actually save our marriage by giving me freedom.
She was trying to gaslight me into feeling guilty for holding her back. I nodded slowly as if I was processing her deep emotional needs. If we do this, we need clear parameters and absolute honesty. We need written ground rules. Chloe practically beamed with excitement. She thought I was weak, pushover husband who would accept anything to keep her happy. The next morning, I drafted a legal framework contract for our open relationship agreement. I added specific clauses that seemed fair on the surface. Rule number 1 was total financial separation during the trial period. Neither partner could use joint savings or the other spouse's earnings for outside dating activities. Rule number 2 prohibited bringing any external romantic partners into our shared marital residence. Rule number 3 stated that any violation of these agreed boundaries would void the contract and trigger an immediate fault divorce. Chloe barely scanned the document before signing her name at the bottom.
You are so rigid, Mark, but if this makes you comfortable, fine.
She signed it without knowing that I was already 3 steps ahead of her. Besides my main career in high-tech consulting, I run a small acoustic engineering side business. My home office studio is packed with high-end audio hardware and micro-directional recording units. That afternoon, I told Chloe I was testing new acoustic noise cancellation sensors for a client project. I installed small studio microphones hidden seamlessly inside the ceiling light fixtures of the living room and master bedroom. These microphones were hardwired into my encrypted cloud server with live remote access from my phone. 2 days after signing the agreement, I told Chloe that I had an urgent business trip in Chicago. I packed my bags, kissed her on the cheek, and drove out of the driveway at 7 in the morning. I did not fly to Chicago. I drove 30 minutes away to a quiet hotel room and opened my laptop. Now begins update 1 of this nightmare. At 8 in the evening, my phone received an automated audio threshold alert from the home studio server. I plugged in my studio headphones and started listening to the live stream feed. I heard the front door lock click open. Chloe was speaking in a playful tone that I had not heard in years.
Come on in. The house is completely empty. Mark left for his stupid Chicago conference this morning.
A man's deep voice answered her immediately.
Are you sure it is safe? What if he comes back early?
I instantly recognized that voice. It was Julian, 34 years old, the director of our local church choir and youth pastor. He was a prominent community figure who constantly preached about family values and morality. Chloe chuckled softly over the high-definition microphone feed.
Mark is totally clueless. I spent 2 weeks dropping hints about feeling trapped.
And he actually bought the open marriage story?
He even made me sign some silly contract. He thinks he is so smart with his rules.
My hands tightened around my laptop frame as I kept recording every single decibel.
He has almost $200,000 saved in his private consulting account. Once he gets used to the open marriage, I will slowly drain his savings for our trip to Italy.
You are wicked, Chloe, but I like it.
He is just a pathetic paycheck, Julian. You are the one I actually want.
They walked straight into our master bedroom, violating every single rule of the contract she signed 48 hours ago. The audio captured 4 hours of crystal clear recordings of their conversation and intimate encounters. They laughed about my gullibility while drinking my expensive whiskey in my own bed. Sitting in that cold hotel room, my heart did not break. The sadness left my body and was replaced by ice-cold surgical precision. I downloaded the audio file, rendered a backup copy on 3 separate flash drives, and uploaded it to a secure server. My soon-to-be ex-wife thought she was playing me for a fool to steal my hard-earned life savings. She had no idea that her foolish open marriage trap was about to dismantle her entire reputation. At midnight, I picked up my phone and called my best friend David, who is a senior partner at a top family law firm.
Mark, it is midnight. Is everything okay?
I kept my voice completely steady as I stared out the hotel window. David, I need you to draft immediate asset protection trusts and prepare severe fault divorce petitions.
What happened?
I have 4 hours of high-definition audio proof of Chloe and Julian, the choir director. She admitted on tape to gaslighting me to steal my money, and she brought him into my bed.
If you have written contract rules signed by her, she just handed us total legal leverage.
I don't just want a divorce, David. I want every single asset, and I want them both completely ruined. Tell me what we do next. David leaned back in his office chair and tapped his pen against the desk. He told me that anger is useless in a courtroom. He said we needed absolute surgical precision to tear her life apart. Chloe had made a massive tactical error by drafting her own contract. She wanted an open relationship on paper to make herself feel less guilty. She never expected me to actually use her own rules against her.
She wrote that neither spouse could bring outside partners into the marital home.
David pointed at Clause 4 on the signed agreement. That was rule number 4 in her document. She had also added a clause stating that no marital funds could be spent on third parties. She wrote those rules thinking they would keep me locked down. She assumed I was too weak and heartbroken to read the fine print.
She broke every single rule she wrote within 48 hours.
I pulled out my laptop and opened my digital audio workstation. As a tech consultant and audio engineer, I keep high-grade condenser microphones in my home studio. The room is acoustically treated, but the mics are sensitive enough to pick up conversations down the hallway. I played the raw audio file from last Thursday afternoon. On the recording, the front door unlocked at 2 in the afternoon. I was supposed to be in another state for a client meeting. Chloe came inside with Julian, the local choir director. The audio was crystal clear.
Don't worry about Mark. He is completely clueless and desperate to save our marriage.
Hearing her voice on my studio monitors made my blood run cold. She laughed while describing how easily she manipulated me. She told Julian that she pitched the open relationship just to cover her tracks.
Are you sure he won't check the joint savings account?
Julian asked that question with complete arrogance. My soon-to-be ex-wife told him that I never checked the secondary accounts. She explicitly stated that she was transferring $3,000 from our joint savings to pay for their weekend beach resort. David paused the recording and smiled. He told me that she had just committed financial fraud within a marital agreement. By spending joint savings on her lover, she violated state family law and breached her own contract.
We are not going to confront her yet. We need to secure your capital first.
David gave me direct instructions on how to isolate my income. My tech consulting business earns over $200,000 a year. Up until that point, all my invoices were deposited into our shared account. David drafted documents to establish a private business trust under my name. The next morning, I redirected all incoming client payments to the new trust. I left only a minimal balance in the shared account. I wanted her to feel comfortable while we laid the trap. When I returned home that evening, Chloe was sitting on the couch with her laptop. She looked at me with fake sympathy. She claimed she spent the day reflecting on her personal growth and identity.
I really appreciate you giving me space to explore myself, Mark.
She said those words with a straight face. I looked at her and felt absolutely nothing. I told her that I only wanted her to be happy. She smiled, believing that I was totally controlled by her gaslighting. 2 days later, update 1 of our plan went into effect. I spent 6 hours reviewing the rest of the studio audio logs. I discovered something far bigger than simple cheating. Julian was not just using my wife, he was stealing from his own employer. On the audio tape, Julian complained about the upcoming church financial audit. He mentioned that he had been misusing the youth choir travel budget for 5 months. He was submitting fake hotel receipts to the church board to cover his affair expenses with Chloe. My soon-to-be ex-wife actually helped him forge those invoices on her laptop. She laughed on tape about how stupid the church board elders were. She called the church members gullible fools who trusted Julian without question. I brought the audio snippet to David the following afternoon. David listened to Julian explaining how he laundered $6,000 of church funds. David leaned forward and put his hands together.
This is no longer just a divorce case. This is grand larceny and embezzlement.
David told me that exposing Julian to the church board would ruin him instantly, but doing it too early would give Chloe time to hire an aggressive defense attorney. We needed to let them execute their next trick, so the trap would snap shut completely. That Friday, Update 2 began. Chloe handed me a flyer for a regional choir retreat in the neighboring state. She told me she needed to attend the 3-day weekend event to support local community arts.
Julian asked me to help manage the choir logistics for the weekend.
She claimed she was just acting as a volunteer organizer. She asked if she could use our joint credit card to book her room. I looked at her and nodded calmly. I told her to use the card for whatever she needed. She had no idea that I had set up real-time transaction alerts on that card. I also knew that every single transaction would serve as irrefutable evidence of contract breach and asset dissipation. On Saturday morning, Chloe packed her bags and left early. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I went into her home office. She had left her secondary laptop logged into her cloud storage account. I inserted a high-speed flash drive and began downloading her backed-up files. I found dozens of saved text threads, hotel reservations, and shared bank transfers between her and Julian dating back 7 months. She had been cheating on me long before she ever mentioned the words open relationship. The entire open relationship conversation was just a calculated trick to legalize her ongoing affair.
Then I found a folder labeled with Julian's name. Inside was a PDF document that made my jaw drop. Julian had listed my soon-to-be ex-wife on the church's official payroll as an independent contractor.
He was writing tax-deductible church checks directly to Chloe's personal account. She was taking money meant for underprivileged youth music programs and using it for luxury spa days. I called David immediately and read the document details over the phone. David told me to print 3 physical copies of every single file. He said the timing was finally perfect.
The church board meets every Sunday morning before the main service.
David told me that the senior pastor and board elders would all be in the conference room at 8 in the morning. Julian was scheduled to lead the morning worship choir at 10. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a credit card notification. Chloe had just charged $1,200 at a 5-star luxury resort 2 hours away. Attached to the digital receipt was the room description. It was a single king bed suite booked under Julian's name using my credit card. I packed the printed documents into a neat leather folder. I grabbed the USB drive containing the crystal clear studio audio files. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror and adjusted my jacket. I drove toward the church in total silence. The rain was heavy against the windshield, but my mind was completely clear. I pulled into the church parking lot at 7:45 on Sunday morning. I walked up the stone steps toward the board conference room. Through the glass doors, I could see the senior pastor and 6 board members sitting around the table. Just as I reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed again. It was a text message from my soon-to-be ex-wife.
Hope you are having a quiet weekend at home, sweetie. Missing you.
I stared at the screen for 2 seconds and placed the phone back in my pocket. I pushed open the conference room door and stepped inside. The senior pastor stood up and looked at me with confusion. He asked how he could help me on a Sunday morning. I opened my leather folder and placed the audit documents directly in front of him. I told him that his choir director was currently at a luxury resort spending church funds with my wife. The pastor's face turned completely pale as he scanned the top page, but before he could speak, the conference room phone rang. It was the church treasurer calling from the main office downstairs. He sounded panicked. He told the pastor that state financial investigators had just arrived at the building with a warrant for Julian's records. The senior pastor stared at the receiver in absolute shock. The room went deathly silent. I sat back calmly in my chair while David closed his briefcase. Every single board member turned to look at Julian. Julian stood up so fast his chair slammed against the hardwood floor. His face turned completely white.
There has to be a mistake. This is a personal matter.
He stammered through his words, but nobody in that room was listening to him anymore. The lead investigator entered the second-floor conference room within 2 minutes. He had 2 uniformed officers with him. They officially requested Julian's church email logs, travel expense receipts, and personal bank statements. David handed the investigator a duplicate binder of the financial audit we had prepared over the weekend. The paper trail was flawless. Over 14 months, Julian had siphoned $32,000 from the youth choir fund. He spent that stolen money on luxury hotel stays, weekend trips, and expensive dinners with my soon-to-be ex-wife. Julian claimed the expenses were for choir recruitment trips across 3 states. However, my home studio audio equipment proved that Chloe was with him on every single trip. The church board suspended Julian on the spot, without pay pending criminal prosecution. Officers escorted Julian out of the building in front of 30 church staff members. I walked out to my car, feeling a cold sense of absolute satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. Now it was time to address the home front and protect my own lifetime savings. Update 2. 3 weeks before the church board reveal, David had warned me about joint liability. If Chloe took money from Julian, she could be named as an accomplice in grand larceny. I needed to insulate my earnings, my house, and my consulting business before the state stepped in. Chloe thought she was playing a master-class game of manipulation against me. She believed I was a naive husband who accepted an open relationship out of fear of losing her. Every week, she transferred funds from our secondary account into her personal account. She thought I was too distracted by my audio consulting job to notice the balance dropping. What she did not know was that I had already redirected my primary income contracts. David helped me set up an independent revocable trust and a private business account in my name only. My clients paid my consulting fees directly into the newly established trust account. I left only $5,000 in our shared checking account to cover basic utilities and mortgage payments. Whenever Chloe asked why the joint balance was low, I gave her a calm, rehearsed answer. I told her that 2 major corporate clients had delayed their quarterly invoice payments. She swallowed the lie without hesitation because it fit her high and mighty view of me.
She assumed I was struggling financially while Julian showered her with stolen church money.
My home studio high-definition microphones continued to record her phone conversations every single evening. In one recording, Chloe laughed while talking to her sister about our open relationship contract.
He actually signed it. Mark is so weak, he thinks this will save our marriage while I get everything I want.
Hearing those words from my own wife of 4 years destroyed any remaining trace of hesitation in my heart.
She was not looking for self-discovery or exploring her identity as she had claimed.
She was actively executing a calculated plot to drain my resources while carrying on an affair.
I saved that audio file in 3 secure cloud locations and handed a copy to David.
Update 3.
At 6:30 on the evening after Julian was escorted out of the church, Chloe stormed into the house. She slammed the front door so hard the glass pane rattled in its frame.
Her cheeks were flushed red, and her hands were trembling with sheer rage and panic.
What did you do, Mark? What on earth did you say to Julian's church board?
I was sitting at the dining table quietly reviewing my financial spreadsheets with a cup of coffee.
I did not raise my voice or show a single drop of emotion. I told her that I merely provided truthful documentation regarding church choir expenditures.
Chloe grabbed the back of a dining chair, her knuckles turning bone white.
You ruined his life. They fired him, and the police are investigating his bank records. Do you have any idea what this does to me?
I took a slow sip of my coffee and looked directly into her eyes.
I asked her why the firing of a local youth pastor should impact my wife so severely.
She choked on her own words for a second before trying to gaslight me again.
He is my partner under our agreement. You agreed to an open relationship. You promised you would be mature about this.
I reached into my leather folder and pulled out the signed open relationship agreement. I pointed directly to Section 4 of the document she had drafted herself. Section 4 explicitly stated that neither party could use marital assets to fund outside romantic activities. It also stated that any illegal conduct by a third party would void all financial protection clauses. Chloe stared at the paper as if she was seeing it for the very first time. I informed my soon-to-be ex-wife that Julian had used stolen funds to pay for her luxury hotel stays.
Furthermore, she had accepted cash transfers from Julian that originated directly from the church treasury.
Her eyes widened in horror as the legal reality finally registered in her mind.
I did not know where he got the money. Mark, you have to help me. Tell the investigators it was a misunderstanding. I placed my phone on the wooden table between us and hit the play button on a recorded audio clip.
The room filled with the clear sound of Chloe's voice, recorded 3 weeks prior in our home studio. On the tape, she clearly stated that she knew Julian was using choir funds and that she did not care as long as he kept spending it on her.
Chloe dropped into the chair, her face draining of all car.
She tried to reach out and touch my hand, but I pulled back immediately.
Mark, please. We can fix this. I will end everything with Julian right now. We can close the marriage today.
I looked at her with complete detachment. The woman standing before me was a complete stranger. I told her that closing the marriage was no longer an available option on the table. Right on cue, my doorbell rang twice. I opened the front door to reveal a process server standing on the porch, holding an envelope. The process server confirmed Chloe's name and handed her a thick stack of legal documents. They were formal divorce papers, along with a petition for immediate asset freezing and exclusive occupancy of the home. Chloe stood in the hallway, clutching the divorce documents, while her phone began ringing frantically. It was Julian calling her from the police station after being formally taken into custody.
She answered on speakerphone in a state of sheer hysterics, begging him to tell her what was happening. Julian's voice was terrified and breathless over the speaker.
Chloe, the police showed me bank records. They know about the secondary account you opened under my name.
My stomach tightened as I heard Julian reveal that crucial piece of information. I stepped closer to Chloe and looked at her trembling hands holding the phone. She had opened a secret joint bank account with her lover using funds she drained from my savings. State investigators had already flagged that account as a primary vessel for money laundering. Chloe looked up at me with absolute terror in her eyes, realizing she was facing potential criminal charges. Just as she opened her mouth to scream at me, 2 police cars pulled up to our driveway with flashing lights. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated our front lawn as 2 officers stepped out of their cruisers. My soon-to-be ex-wife froze on the front porch with her mouth open in absolute disbelief. She immediately tried to point her finger at me and yelled that I was harassing her.
Arrest him. He illegally recorded my private conversations and tampered with my accounts.
The lead officer did not even glance at me as he unclipped his handcuffs. He read out her full legal name and stated that he possessed an active warrant for grand larceny and wire fraud. David stepped forward calmly and handed the lead detective a certified copy of the state forensic audit. The officers turned Chloe around and placed her wrists in metal cuffs right in front of our gathering neighbors. She began weeping hysterically and screamed for me to step in and fix this nightmare immediately.
Mark, tell them this is a huge mistake. You are my husband. You have to protect me.
I stood on the porch with my hands in my pockets and maintained complete silence. I reminded her that under her signed open relationship agreement, we maintained strict financial independence and separate legal liabilities. As the cruiser doors slammed shut, David checked his watch and motioned toward his car. He told me that the emergency church board meeting was starting in exactly 20 minutes across town. We left Chloe in the back of the police car and drove directly to Grace Community Church. Update 1. The emergency boardroom confrontation. When David and I walked into the church conference room, Julian was already standing at the podium. He was wearing his tailored suit and addressing 6 senior church elders with a solemn expression. Julian claimed that he had uncovered financial irregularities caused entirely by an unstable church volunteer named Chloe. He was actively attempting to throw my soon-to-be ex-wife under the bus before anyone could question his own actions. He told the board that Chloe had stalked him and manipulated choir funds without his knowledge or consent. The senior pastor looked deeply troubled and asked if Julian had any proof to back up his serious allegations. That was the exact moment David opened his briefcase and plugged a flash drive into the boardroom media system. I stepped up to the podium, introduced myself as a professional audio engineer, and pressed play on the master controller. Crystal clear, high-definition audio filled the entire boardroom instantly. The entire board heard Julian's recognizable voice laughing about draining church choir travel accounts to finance luxury weekend getaways. They heard him explicitly detailing how he persuaded Chloe to demand an open relationship so they could use my house. Julian's face drained of all color as the audio played his exact blueprint for exploiting church donations.
This is an AI fabrication. He modified my voice using specialized studio equipment.
I calmly distributed bound folders containing raw acoustic metadata, timestamp logs, and verified bank transfers. The documents showed direct transfers from the choir account into Julian's personal shell company over 9 consecutive months. The total amount embezzled from the church youth fund exceeded $65,000. The senior pastor stood up, looked directly at Julian with disgust, and declared the immediate termination of his employment. The board voted unanimously to strip him of his ministerial credentials and call the police department immediately. Update 2.
Unraveling the gaslighting narrative.
2 police officers arrived at the church boardroom within 15 minutes to place Julian under arrest. As they escorted Julian through the hallway, he completely lost his composure and screamed accusations at everyone. He shouted that Chloe was the mastermind who forced him to drain the church funds under threat of exposure. David recorded Julian's outburst on his phone and added it directly to our legal evidence vault. By midnight, both Chloe and Julian were sitting in separate holding cells at the precinct headquarters. David arranged a brief meeting with Chloe's court-appointed public defender in the precinct visitor room.
My soon-to-be ex-wife looked completely destroyed, wearing a gray jumpsuit with messy hair and smeared makeup. The moment she saw me through the glass partition, she grabbed the receiver and began begging for forgiveness. She claimed that Julian had brainwashed her and manipulated her fragile emotional state for months. She promised to cancel the open relationship immediately and offered to sign any marital agreement I wanted. She swore that she would spend the rest of her life making up for her terrible mistake if I dropped the charges. I picked up the telephone receiver on my side of the glass and spoke in a cold, measured voice. I told her that she had made her choice on that quiet Tuesday evening when she presented her open relationship contract.
I pointed out that her own contract contained a clause stating that pre-agreement fraud voided all claims to marital assets.
I informed her that every single joint account had been legally frozen by court order hours ago. Update 3. Serving the final destruction. David stepped up to the glass partition and slid a thick stack of legal documents under the tray. He officially served her with contested divorce papers, citing severe financial fraud and irretrievable breakdown of marriage. The documents outlined our complete asset division, requesting full retention of the home, my savings, and my consulting firm. Chloe's attorney flipped through the evidence packet and sighed heavily before looking at his client. He quietly advised Chloe that fighting the terms in court would be an absolute disaster, given the overwhelming evidence. He explained that the state prosecutor had already approved felony charges for wire fraud and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. Chloe realized that Julian had already given a recorded confession blaming her for initiating the entire scheme. She burst into fresh tears and slammed her hands against the reinforced glass partition in complete desperation.
You planned this whole thing. You set a trap for me from the very beginning.
I leaned close to the microphone and delivered my final words to her before walking away. I told her that I merely provided the rope, but she and her lover chose to hang themselves with it. I hung up the receiver, turned my back on her screaming face, and walked out into the cool midnight air. By the next morning, news of the church choir director's arrest hit the front page of our local newspaper. Chloe's employer saw the public arrest record and issued an immediate termination notice regarding her executive position. In a single 48-hour period, she lost her marriage, her lover, her professional career, and her entire social standing. David filed an emergency motion for summary judgment to finalize the divorce and asset forfeiture without trial. However, late Thursday afternoon, David received an urgent phone call from the county courthouse clerk. Chloe's defense counsel had just filed a shock counterpetition claiming that the home studio recordings violated state wiretapping laws. They were demanding that all audio evidence be suppressed and that I be criminally charged with illegal surveillance. David chuckled over the phone and told me to meet him at the courthouse for the preliminary motion hearing tomorrow morning. He told me he had kept one final legal masterstroke hidden in his pocket specifically for this exact desperate attempt. The next morning at 9 a.m, David and I walked into courtroom 302. My soon-to-be ex-wife Chloe sat at the defense table next to Julian and their high-priced attorney. Chloe looked pale, but her eyes flashed with anger the moment she saw me enter. Her attorney immediately stood up and addressed the judge regarding our motion.
He argued that my home studio recordings violated state wiretapping statutes and constituted illegal surveillance. He demanded that every single piece of audio evidence be suppressed and destroyed immediately. Julian nodded smugly beside Chloe, believing their expensive lawyer had saved them from total ruined public exposure. David slowly rose from his chair, buttoned his suit jacket, and approached the bench with a calm smile.
He handed the judge a single stapled document labeled Exhibit B.
David explained that 2 weeks before the recordings, Chloe had signed our formal open relationship agreement. He pointed directly to Section 14, Paragraph 3 of the contract she had so eagerly drafted and signed. That specific clause stated both parties explicitly consented to continuous ambient audio logging in shared residential spaces. The clause was designed to verify compliance with boundary rules and prevent false personal misconduct allegations. Chloe had blindly signed it without reading the fine print because she was desperate to legitimize her affair. The judge reviewed the signature page, noted the notarized stamp, and looked over his glosses at Chloe's attorney. The judge ruled that Chloe had legally waived her expectation of privacy within the residence under contract law. The motion to suppress was denied entirely, and all 3 audio files were admitted as evidence.
Update 4.
With the audio evidence ruled admissible, Chloe's legal defense completely collapsed in less than 20 minutes. David then presented the second half of our hidden counterattack to the presiding judge. The open relationship contract contained a strict bad faith breach penalty clause that Chloe had completely ignored. It stated that any pre-existing infidelity or intentional financial fraud prior to the agreement invalidated all marital property claims. Our financial forensic audit proved Chloe had diverted over $30,000 of joint savings to Julian over 6 months. The judge made his ruling swift, decisive, and brutally clear to everyone present in the courtroom. Chloe was declared in material breach of marital duty and guilty of intentional civil fraud against our estate. The court awarded me 100% of our 4-bedroom house, my private consulting firm, and all bank accounts. Chloe was awarded 0 spousal support, 0 alimony, and 0 claim to my future consulting revenue. Furthermore, the judge ordered Chloe to repay $32,000 in embezzled marital funds back to me within 90 days. She was also ordered to cover all of my legal fees, totaling $14,000. Julian sat frozen as his own attorney quietly informed him that the church board was filing separate criminal fraud charges. Julian's wife had already filed for emergency divorce that morning, freezing all of his personal bank assets. As the judge slammed his gavel to close the hearing, Chloe broke down into uncontrollable, hysterical sobbing. She realized she had walked into court expecting a financial payout and walked out with absolute financial ruin.
Final update.
I collected my documents from David and walked out into the marble hallway toward the exit doors. Chloe ran after me, her makeup ruined and her voice trembling uncontrollably with desperation.
Mark, please wait. We need to talk about this logically.
She grabbed my forearm, but I stepped back and let David stand firmly between us. She claimed Julian had manipulated her and lied to her about his church choir funds. She begged me to close our open relationship and go back to how things were 4 years ago. She promised she would work 2 jobs to pay back every single penny if I took her back. I looked at my soon-to-be ex-wife with complete emotional detachment and answered her in one sentence. You wanted an open relationship, and now you are completely open to face the consequences alone. I turned around and walked out of the courthouse without looking back at her a single time. 3 months have passed since that final court hearing, and the dust has finally settled completely. Julian was officially terminated by the church board and lost his pastoral ministry credentials permanently. He was forced to sell his luxury vehicle to settle the choir fund embezzlement lawsuit out of court.
His ex-wife received full custody of their children and their family home in their swift divorce settlement.
Julian now works as an hourly clerk at a suburban auto parts store, living in his brother's basement. Chloe was forced to move out of our home within 48 hours of the court ruling.
She could not afford a standard apartment because her credit score tanked from unpaid credit cards.
She currently lives in a tiny 300-square-foot basement studio on the far side of town.
She works 45 hours a week as a junior receptionist, barely making enough to cover her basic rent.
Her monthly paycheck is heavily garnished by a court order to pay off her legal debt owed to me.
She tried reaching out through her mother twice, begging for a reduced payment plan, but David rejected every attempt.
I kept our 4-bedroom home, upgraded my home studio gear, and expanded my tech consulting business significantly.
My private assets are fully secured inside family trusts, completely protected from any future legal interference.
The silence in my home is no longer filled with suspicion, lies, or manipulative mind games.
I sat in my quiet studio every evening, knowing that total justice was served through meticulous preparation and patience.
Conclusion.
That was a remarkably calculated and satisfying conclusion to a treacherous situation, OP.
Betrayal built on greedy manipulation will always collapse under the weight of its own arrogance when exposed to facts. Mark used patience, legal precision, and clear evidence to protect his dignity and strip his unfaithful spouse of everything.
What do you make of this? Share your thoughts below.
If you enjoyed this absolute justice story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories every day.